My name is Robert Winters, and I'm president of the McGill Community for Lifelong Learning. I would like to welcome you to part 2 of this groundbreaking lecture series that marks a new collaboration between MCLL and the McGill University Retiree Association, or MURA. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind us that McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. We are very happy to have you with us today as we explore the important topic of can we prevent cognitive decline associated with aging. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Serge Gauthier, one of the world-class experts that are part of this excellent lecture series. I would like to introduce Dr. Antti Pajan, president of MURA, who has been crucial in helping build MCLL's relationship with his group representing retired McGill employees. At McGill since 1976, Antti is a professor in pharmacology and therapeutics. He has done research in neuroscience, pharmacology, therapeutics, and also clinical research on alcoholism. And he also has 30 years of experience using information technology to manage patient care in intensive care units and in medical education. He's the founder and director of E. Medici de McGill, an orchestra that plays classical music with a professional conductor. The next concert is a benefit for people suffering from the war in Ukraine on May 19. And he has organized this series of presentations on behalf of our 2 organizations. Today's session is the second, and the remaining 3 are not to be missed. We hope to see you at the other ones. Go ahead, please, Antti.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I would like also to express, shall we say, thanks to our colleagues from MCLL on this very fruitful collaboration. And I think this is just second of our projects, and we hope to do it in the future as well. We are also very fortunate to have Professor Serge Gauthier as a speaker in this series on mental health. Serge is actually going to be our member because he just retired. But people like him never retire. We retire, but we don't notice that we retired. So we expect he's going to continue working. Just a few words about his, shall we say, career. He is a graduate of University de Montréal, and then he did his studies in research and neurology at McGill, and moving from neuro, where he spent, I believe, 10 years, and then started the group, McGill University Research Center for Studies of Aging, that he was director, and then ended to be a director of Alzheimer's disease and related disorders research unit. He is now working also in our very famous simulation center, which really is a very unique institution to train our medical students without using patients. Now, that's another topic. Dr. Gauthier is recognized world expert in studies, on clinical studies of dementia. He was one of the first, if not the first, to identify, to study actually several drugs that have potential in slowing down dementia. He is going to tell us more about how else to prevent dementia. Certainly drugs have not yet been mainstay of approach. For his great contribution to science and clinical medicine, Serge Gauthier was appointed in the Order of Canada, I think 2014, National Order of Quebec, 2017, and it certainly is one of the pillars of our efforts to deal with this ever-increasing problem in our modern society. We'll live long, and dementia somehow catches up with us. You may have noticed that there are many labels saying, you know, expiration date for this and such part of our body has been passed. So that's one of the things that we have to deal with. So I will then only say that it's again a great privilege to have Professor Serge Gauthier speaking in this series, and I would like to ask him to address his lecture, which has to start by sharing his screen with us, and I think Rick will help with this and his slides. Okay. We see your slides.
Okay.
All you have to do is press, that's it.
Thank you for attending this presentation today. I took a great pleasure in preparing it. I'm at the age where I share with you the interest in preventing cognitive decline with age. And we can do something about this in many ways, as we will discuss over the next hour or so. And I look forward to your questions at the end. Just some conflict of interest statement. I'm a member of editorial boards, and I do provide advice as a scientist to various companies. I don't think this is relevant for today's presentation. So the objectives for my presentation today are as follows. Look at the natural history of age-associated cognitive decline. So forgive me for using Alzheimer's disease as a template because it's what I'm most familiar with, but I will use it to show that there are other things that happen long before dementia that we are in a way familiar with. You'll see when I talk about it, and it may be just an early warning. And the message is, okay, you get early symptoms, or maybe there's a biological test that will be available. It's a bit like diabetes. You're told there's a little bit of diabetes in your blood, do something about it. So indeed, it will be a motivating factor to use protective factors. So we'll discuss some observational research. So what do we do if you look at large populations? I'll give you a couple of examples of recent studies, one in China that is of great interest. And then we'll talk about what do you do with this information? Can you do something prospective? Can you do randomized clinical trial for prevention of age cognitive decline? And indeed, it has been done in Finland. It's now the model, and we have in Canada ongoing studies that you can be a part of. And I'll give you the contact numbers, phone numbers, and the emails of how to sign up for prevention studies. And finally, we'll have a realistic conclusion about what can we do as individuals. So the 4 parts are as follows: natural history, and I'll have a short summary or at the end of each part. So natural history, findings in observational studies, results in intervention studies, and then population-based versus individual prevention strategies. So this is a diagram we're going to look at for the next 4 minutes or so. It's the template that we use as clinicians when we talk about Alzheimer's disease. Bear with me because it's going to be useful to explain early symptoms before dementia that we can do something about. So most people who have Alzheimer's disease will go through these various phases of symptoms over a span of roughly 8 to 10 years. So the first hump on the left, mood changes, is something not specific. You're just a little more cranky because you can't follow the conversations as well as you used to. You make mistakes when you're playing bridge. You're a bit frustrated. So there's a name for that stage. We'll talk about that in a second. Then there is a relatively straight line of cognitive decline. So that's memory. We can test for that. I'll show you the MOCA if you don't know it already. It's a test also that we need you to help with, because we may be able to do it online instead of having to go to a doctor's office. Then there's a functional change. So you lose ability to be able to pay your bills on time. You need someone to keep an eye on you. And then over time, maybe 5 years after onset of symptoms, you need advice on what to wear depending on the weather and so on. Then there's a second wave of behavior changes in typical Alzheimer, which is the most difficult phase for families. Because you don't recognize the house, you don't recognize the spouse, and it can lead to agitation and nighttime, especially changes. And then these behaviors improve over time, and then you have a Parkinson-like last stage of Alzheimer, which is common to all dementias, where you have trouble walking and you have trouble swallowing. So now we're going to move before dementia. So you have no symptoms. But you're aware that you're not as quick as you used to be. So there's a name for that. It's something you can look up on Google, subjective cognitive decline. And it's universal. It means you're not, it means
You're
you're not.
welcome. Now you know how to do it. Bye.
Can you mute?
Rick, can you put everybody on mute, please?
Thank you. So this is something we all experience. When you're over 60, you're not as quick to learn a second language or third language. I know I'm trying to learn German because of my grandchildren in Stuttgart. That's normal, but it has a name, subjective. You're the one who experiences this change, and it's cognitive decline. It's not a loss or impairment. That's normal. There's some studies about that. Would you be more at risk if you have experience of a subjective decline? Are you more at risk of having dementia 15 years later? Maybe, but that would be if you also have some genetic factors at play. If you're ApoE4, so that's a common gene variation in the population. Roughly 15% of our population has this one copy inherited from one of our parents. That makes a gene that controls the handling of cholesterol in the body. So it's involved in cholesterol transport. And if you have, instead of number 4, you're a bit less efficient in repairing nerve cell membranes. And if you have 2 copies from both sides of the family, so you're 4-4, then you're more at risk of difficulties with brain repair if you have a head injury. If you have a stroke, it takes longer to recover. If you were due to get Parkinson for whatever reason, you'll have it at a younger age. If you were due to get Alzheimer, you'll get it at a younger age. So it's not a gene for Alzheimer, but it's a common gene that sometimes people get tested for. All this to say, we can come back to this in the question period, that there is one gene that is commonly known to be somehow involved with Alzheimer, but it's not a causal gene. It's just a risk gene. And there's a lot of things you can do to offset that risk, as I will get into in a few minutes. So just to finish, subjective cognitive decline is normal. It's kind of universal, especially for people who used to work in the university. And it does not predict a progression to dementia unless it's associated with another factor, such as a genetic factor. Okay, subjective it is. So mild behavioral impairment is a new term. It's been coined by a psychiatrist in Calgary, Dr. Zainur Ismail. So it's a name for that phase of subtle change in mood and behavior that we may experience as we get older. It's not very specific. It's being a little more cranky when you're frustrated. It's being a little less able to have a conversation, just keeping track, especially if we're hard hearing. But it has a name, and we have a checklist, MBI checklist. So mild behavioral, I just checked I emphasize here, there's no cognitive decline, just change in mood and behavior, not very specific. It could be called depression associated with old age, but that could be associated with lots of things happening in your life, obviously, with the COVID and so on. So it's a term you will see in the literature. If you look it up, MBI, you will see a lot of material about it. At McGill, we're doing research on what happens in your brain when you're going through that stage. And some people with these non-specific symptoms of social withdrawal and being a little cranky, some of them will have the changes in their brain that are found with Alzheimer's, but not most people. Okay. Now, mild cognitive impairment, that's getting to a more medical stage of the disease. Mild cognitive impairment, it could last 3 to 5 years before it progresses into dementia. So it's an opportunity for treatment if the MCI is due to Alzheimer's. But most people with mild cognitive impairment, which is defined as a decline on a paper and pencil test like the MoCA, which I will illustrate in a few minutes, most people do not progress to dementia unless there's an additional factor at play, such as you had a small stroke, or you're at risk to get a stroke, or you have this ApoE4 gene I talked about already. So just to reassure you, if you are tested with the MoCA and you are told, well, it was 28 out of 30 last year, it's 27 or 26 out of 30 this year, so there is by definition a mild cognitive impairment, it does not mean that you will progress to dementia, but it is a first warning that you should pay attention to preventive factors, which we will talk about today. And then you have dementia, mild, moderate, severe, which is not the topic today. So I just want to draw your attention to 2 types of tests. The one is the MoCA that many of you know, and all of us will be tested with, and we need volunteers to validate the MoCA to be done online. And the other test I want to tell you a bit about is the CDR, because it's talked about in the lay press. Clinical dementia rating is a checklist done by physicians when they monitor someone with MCI or early dementia who will undergo the new treatments with medications that take out of the brain the abnormal proteins. And it's talked about in the lay press, and I want you to be aware of what the debate is about. So the MoCA is a test that was designed by Dr. Ziad Nasreddin on the South Shore at Neuro Rive Sud. It's a 30-point scale, and I'll let you look at it while I talk. It's done by non-physicians with a minimum of training. The MoCA now, there's a certification you can do online, certified MoCA tester, because if you want to do it in a rigorous way, so you can repeat the test in a year, in 2 years, and 5 years, there's variations. So it's not, if you worry about practice effects, indeed, you should be, because some of you have done it once and, oh yeah, I remember the lion, and I remember making a mistake with the middle animal. I thought it was a pig. No, it's a rhino. And the one on the left, it's not a llama, it's a dromedary. But if you say camel, you still get a good score. So, and the 5 words you have to remember for 3-4 minutes. We do change the words, I reassure you. So if you worry about the practice effect, we're aware of it. So all this to say that we need volunteers. So that's one slide you may want to take a picture of, but I'll show you at the very end a summary slide where I will again show that email address, info@mocatest.org. I'm told that's the way to sign up as a volunteer. We want to see if the MoCA can be done online. And that's part of a global effort because of the pandemic with COVID-19, a global effort so for people to self-screen themselves online with the MBI checklist. You can do that on your own. The MoCA, you'll be able to do on your own. And another checklist that is still under development. Do you have trouble planning and executing activities of daily living that you used to be able to do well So if you never did laundry, we're not going to ask you about, are you still able to do laundry? But if you used to play cards well, especially bridge, do you see a change now? So there may be a checklist that will be available very soon if you want to know about yourself. And then if you repeat the checklist every so often, after a year, after 2 years, you may see if there is a decline, and then what do we do about it? This may be coupled with some blood tests that are under development that I'll tell you about. And it's a bit like PSA for prostate cancer. There's a marker in the blood. It's a bit like blood sugar as a forewarning of diabetes. So there may be very soon, within 3 years, an option for people who want to do a self-check how they're doing, combined with a blood test that may look at ApoE4, a genotype, and a new marker that I will tell you about that reflects what's going on in your brain. So I think you all now have info@mocatest.org, and do sign up to help validate this a very important tool, which is available around the world. That's one of the beauties of us all working together around the world on prevention and treatment of dementia, is that we pool resources. The MoCA is available in at least 30 languages. And if you look up MoCA using Google, you will see translations in Chinese. There's 3 of them actually, and all languages. Okay, the CDR, I just wanted to say something about it because it's in the lay press. There's a debate in the US about approving 2 drugs in the past year on the basis of changes on that instrument. So it's worth knowing a little more about it. So it's a checklist that's done over about 20 minutes by interview with the family member that comes with the person who has mild cognitive impairment or early dementia, and then doing some testing with the person who has symptoms. There's 6 domains, 6 items are being checked: memory, orientation, judgment, problem solving, that's 3. And then community affairs, home and hobbies, personal care, that's 3 items. So each domain is scored 0 to 3. So the maximum score you can get is 6 times 3, 18. The sum of these, that's what we call the CDR sum of boxes. Just to give you a feel, a total of 4.5 out of 18, usually you have mild dementia. And the change over a year is in the order of 0.5 to 1.5, 1.4 per year. And the best result so far with the best Alzheimer drug is this. This is a diagram that was published, the figure that was published just a month ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's the medication called lecanemab. It's an antibody against amyloid. It's given intravenously twice a month for 18 months. So it's quite an involved treatment. And you see in blue, the sum of boxes increasing over time because people get a bit worse naturally. And then the yellow is the lesser decline for those who get the treatment. And the difference at the end, the 18-month treatment, the difference at the end is 0.45, which is equivalent to 9 months roughly of progression. So the big issue as a society and then as individuals, is this worth having infusions intravenously twice a month for a year and a half at the cost of approximately $26,000 a year? And the risk also of having brain swelling and brain hemorrhages in the first months of treatment for such a small difference in progression. That being said, it is still a breakthrough. It's the first time that we have modified the progression of Alzheimer's disease at the stage of mild cognitive impairment or early dementia. And our hope is that since now we can help amyloid, we should add to that treatment something for the other proteins at play, such as tau and perhaps neuroinflammation. That's not the topic for today, so I'll say no more about it. So to summarize this first part, there are prodromal symptoms long before dementia. So subjective cognitive decline would be something like 15 years before dementia if you were to get dementia. And the mild cognitive impairment would be 5 years before dementia if you were to get dementia. So opportunity for therapy. And not all persons with these symptoms will progress, as I said. Researchers are fine-tuning the instruments to measure changes in these very early subtle phases of cognitive decline, and we need your help to validate at least one instrument, the MoCA. So second topic is findings in observational studies. This is something you're more familiar with, but allow me to put this in context. So first I will explain what is happening in the brain as we get older, and then look at what the epidemiologic studies tell us about these changes. This is now the reality that dementia has a certain course. Once you have a diagnosis, you go through mild, moderate, severe stages, as I illustrated at the start. It's a span of 5 to 8 years. What is new for the past 10 years is the middle phase, mild cognitive symptoms, behavior or cognitive, which is 3 to 5 years. And then before symptoms, you may have in the brain already some of the protein changes, and it's not sufficient to cause symptoms. So it's a complex disease, as I will illustrate. It's not just 1 or 2 proteins at play. There's a combination of factors, probably 4, that are needed together to cause dementia. So it's complex in terms of treatment, but it's good because we have more opportunities to modify these various factors. So the classic thing we learn in medical school, and it's still true after 100 years since the discovery of Alzheimer, is that you have beta amyloid deposition in the brain. These are senile plaques called now, you see the little round structure in orange in the left side. So these are clumps of amyloid fibrils. They clump together, and some people think it's actually good. You want to catch the floating oligomers or fragments of the beta-42 toxic protein. You want to clump them together. It's a way to get rid of them. That's not sufficient to cause dementia. Then you have in the middle neurofibrillary tangles, NFTs. It's within the nerve cells. So this is something Dr. Alzheimer himself saw with the optic microscope 100 years ago. You see in black, because it's stained with silver, the inner structure of nerve cells is kind of all tangled, hence the name, neurofibrillary tangles. And this is a protein called tau that is abnormal. It's hyperphosphorylated, so we short that by p-tau, phosphotau. We're learning now that it's happening within the nerve cell, but the abnormal tau protein can leak out into the synapse and jump into another cell. It's a bit like prions, like in mad cow disease, although this has nothing to do with viruses. It's just, we know now that these abnormal changes within the nerve cell can spread from cell to cell all around the brain. Notice on the left something called microglial activation with a beautiful red cell structure. It's new in a way, but we sort of know that if you have arthritis, chronic arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, your risk of dementia is reduced by close to 50%. Oh, we know that for at least 35 years, thanks to Dr. McGill in Vancouver. And the explanation is that we take, if you have arthritis, you take NSAIDs, non-steroidal inflammatory drugs, such as Indocid, Indomethacin, or Naproxen. These are hard medicines for your stomach, but they're very good for arthritis. And it's one explanation why people with chronic arthritis are less likely to have dementia, is that they take over many years some medications for arthritis. And soon, within the next 2 years, we'll be able to actually measure how much inflammation is in your brain using PET scan, and hopefully we can also do it through a blood test or a spinal tap. And this neuroinflammation is the next wave of treatments. Beyond amyloid and tau, probably neuroinflammation will be the third factor we can modify. And we have already drugs to do that. It's just they're not easy on the stomach. So we'll have to find a way so we don't cause a stomach hemorrhage because we want to prevent Alzheimer. So that's 3 factors already you can see. Amyloid buildup over at least 20 years before symptoms. Neurofibrillary tangles, probably 5 years before symptoms. And the microglial activation, neuroinflammation. We're not sure when it happens because we don't have an easy way to measure it, but we're getting there. And finally, you have neuronal loss, cells die, and then the brain shrinks. You see that on the MRI, and then you get symptoms. So you see you have 20 years of pathologic changes in your brain before you get symptoms. So opportunity for prevention. This is a slide made by my co-worker, Dr. Pedro Rosaneto at the Center for Studies in Aging. It's a way to have in one picture all the various factors at play as we get older. So on the left, unhealthy lifestyles. So I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Impaired cerebrovascular function, that's important. It's small strokes, essentially. And we know now for at least 20 years that people over age 90 can have amyloid and tau in their brain as much as someone with Alzheimer's, but they have no symptoms. So what's protecting them over age 90? It seems to be they don't have any stroke, even small ones. So stroke prevention has been a mainstay to prevent dementia in some parts of the world, including Ontario. And their aggressive treatment against stroke, prevention of stroke is starting to pay off. Until just before the pandemic, there were a lot less people in Ontario with stroke, and they were starting to see less people with dementia. This also was found in parts of Scandinavia, like Sweden, and parts of England. So another thing in the middle, you see clearance. So that's the ability of the brain to get rid of the garbage. As we breathe and think, there are proteins made that we need to clear out of the brain. It's done through the spinal fluid. And it's been shown that if you don't sleep very well, especially if you don't have enough REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, when you dream, you don't clear the amyloid out of the brain as efficiently. So that's one mechanism. Inflammatory response, I already told you about that. I'll just add that if you have chronic gingivitis, these bacteria in your gums can get into your brain and stir up an inflammatory response. So that's one preventive approach I'll come back to. Genetics, we already mentioned ApoE4, so you cannot change that. But I want to reassure you that if you know you're ApoE4 carrier, it's not the end of the world. There's plenty of prevention strategies that offset that. And comorbidities, the last one on the right is, well, as we get older, we have arthritis, which may be a good thing if you take arthritis medications, but you may also have chronic heart failure, chronic renal failure. So it's an extra burden on the body as a whole. And the point being made here is that these are kind of additive factors at play in cognitive decline. And Dr. Pedro Rosaneto was actually wondering if it's synergic. So if you have 3 or 4 of these factors, it's feeding on itself and it accelerates the rate of progression from mild cognitive impairment to dementia. So this is now something practical for you. Dr. Rosaneto leads a cohort at McGill. I will show you some examples of what we've done over the past 7 years with volunteers. We look for people who are cognitively healthy, like you guys, or mild cognitive impairment. Maybe you failed on the MoCA test or something similar recently, or you have a diagnosis of mild dementia due to Alzheimer's or another cause of dementia. We want to see you because you're going to get the workup of your life. If you are interested, you get a spinal tap. We look at all the proteins in the spinal fluid. We do brain imaging, as I will show you in a second, using state-of-the-art PET scans. And you do memory tests that are also state-of-the-art. And we give you the results. So if you're cognitively healthy, you get a bilan of your cognitive health. And if you want to know, are you ApoE4 or not? Do you have amyloid in your brain or not? We will tell you if you want to know. So you just have to sign up by calling Jenna at this number, 761-6131, extension 6321. So take a picture. I'll show you that number again at the very end. And I checked the phone number this morning. It works. Yeah. Okay, so what do we do? So what we do measure in the volunteers, these different things, amyloid in the brain, in the blood, and the spinal fluid. Tau protein, we measure it in the brain, spinal fluid, and blood. And evidence of neurodegeneration, smaller brain, loss of nerve cells. It's also reflected in brain size using an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, a PET scan, spinal fluid and blood. And if you have ATN measured, we can say you have the pathology of Alzheimer's disease, or you have part of it, or you don't have any. That's the new research trend, ATN. And these are examples from volunteers who, over the past 3-4 years, who underwent PET scans every 2 years. So we see changes. You see on the top, amyloid, it's in red on the top row. On the very extreme right, you see a lot of red. That's the amyloid in someone who has mild dementia and a lot of amyloid. The middle row in more blue is the tau protein we can visualize with the PET imaging. And the bottom one, mostly green colors, it's a glucose scan. The same kind of glucose scan you would get if you have cancer, and we scan your whole body looking for hotspots. We can do that for the brain. And what happens with when you lose synapses is there's less sugar, glucose being used. So the brain is sort of darker. There's less glucose being used. So it's an indirect way to measure neurodegeneration or lack of synaptic activity. And I just want to flag in red in the middle, 2 individuals. One has no symptoms at all, and one has mild cognitive impairment. And you see the one on the left, there's a little bit of tau protein buildup. It's a natural change with age. We all have a bit of this abnormal tau protein in our memory parts of the brain, the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex. This is why, what's your name again? And you have to think, oh yeah, I met you at a certain time and your name sounds like an animal. Oh yeah, the name comes. There's a lag time. That's normal. It's because of this tau protein buildup. The one on the right with mild cognitive impairment, there's more tau protein. You see it's starting to spread. And if we could arrest this spreading right now and prevent dementia, that would be a victory. And this is what we're aiming for right now. Prevent spread of this tau pathology, which is directly involved with the emergence of dementia. It's not the amyloid buildup so much. It's the tau buildup and spreading that is the key to arrest progression. These are volunteers in our cohort at McGill, who different people you see here at different stage of spread of the tau protein. And the point being made here, it is very exciting when you go to science meetings, is we can show in vivo people alive and well, going through the scan, how much tau protein they have in their brain. And this correlates perfectly well with if we were doing an autopsy of their brain, this is what we would find. So the capacity we have now to image the brain is equivalent to doing an autopsy. It's quite powerful test. Now, surprise, this is a volunteer, 80-year-old man. He looked like he had mild Alzheimer's disease. He needs help for certain things. He has no amyloid in his brain. It happens 5 to 10% of people, we say, you have Alzheimer's, there's no amyloid in their brain. It's another kind of dementia. We're not sure what to call it yet. You see the middle picture, all the red? So that's tau. So he seems to have mostly a dementia due to tau spreading, but there's no amyloid. So it's not Alzheimer's. So he should not go on anti-amyloid therapy. And he should go probably on anti-tau therapy if we had one. Okay, we're nearly done with the biomarkers. Bear with me. It's getting to be practical now because we can do it with a blood test, what we're doing with the PET scan. So for the past year or two, our cohort at McGill and others around the world, especially in Sweden and the part of the United States, we have blood tests that show that fragments of this tau protein that builds up over time, it's detectable on the blood. So you see on the left in the red box, the blue sort of smaller box, it's the levels of a fragment of tau protein that's high in the blood. So this may be equivalent to having a PSA for prostate cancer or other genetic or specific biochemical tests in the blood if you're looking for cancer or a risk of chronic disease such as diabetes. We may have a way here to measure in the blood what's happening in the brain, and that careful what you wish for. So you're 60-year-old, you want your blood test to see if I'm at risk of Alzheimer. We tell you, yeah, it's high as if you had Alzheimer. What do you do now? So yeah, you would go for a study like this. You would get your lumbar puncture, maybe a PET scan, and then you would enroll into a prevention trial with medication probably, because here you're at high risk. On the right, you see curves that neurologists love to show at meetings. Essentially, what it shows is the changes in the brain that occur before dementia. So the changes in the blood and spinal fluid do precede changes with the brain imaging and precede symptoms. So it's a way to measure effects of treatment if you're trying a new treatment for prevention of Alzheimer in people with minimal symptoms. But you can measure in the blood and spinal fluid and now brain imaging changes that may be as meaningful as a lack of progression on the clinical tests. And there's a debate right now, to be honest, whether we should use biomarkers as a surrogate instead of treating people for 2 years to see if their memory is stable. Can you do a 1-year study when you show that the tau is no longer spreading? Is that equivalent to a longer study with a lot more people? You would save time and less people would be needed to show the efficacy of a therapy. So we can come back to that if you're interested in the question period. But we're at it's debated in the lay press even, should a biomarker replace a memory test when you want to treat someone with early Alzheimer. So now something more familiar perhaps is epidemiologic studies, and this is the big one. So take a picture if you can, because these are the 12 known potential modifiable risk factors for dementia. Every 5 years or so, there is this something called Lancet Commission. So the medical journal, The Lancet, it's available online. You just do The Lancet Commission and or dementia prevention. You'll get the article for free. And you look at the 12 items. And one practical thing I would suggest is look if you have some of them. And do something about it. Like hearing loss is a very significant factor to increase the risk of cognitive decline, because you can't remember what you don't hear. And if you don't hear, you're sort of isolating yourself from your family or friends. There are implications that are going beyond just I don't hear. And that can be fixed. Just don't be shy about having a hearing aid if you need one. The high alcohol consumption, this is something Dr. Pageant can help us with in the question period. To make a long story short, it looks like 1 glass a day of your favorite drink is okay. It's actually better than no drinking at all, according to some studies. We probably drink too much right now because of the pandemic. So my advice would be cut down by half whatever you're drinking now and try to aim for 1 glass a day, preferably with a good meal and people around you. Smoking, no argument, it's bad. Low education is not so much an issue in Canada, but it is in Sri Lanka and rural China. Physical inactivity, I'll come back to that. Obesity, I'll come back to that. Diabetes. What is a surprise is air pollution. It made it into the 12 major modifiable risk factors, which was a surprise to me, but it's probably true mostly in some countries like India right now. Look on the right, the red box. It's items that are under work and probably will make it to the big list in 5 years. So sleep disturbances, as I mentioned already, you don't clear the amyloid out of your brain if you have a poor sleep quality, especially if you don't have enough REM sleep. Impaired oral health, I already mentioned chronic gingivitis. These bacteria can get into your brain and stir up neuroinflammation. Loneliness, stress. Unfortunately, this was exacerbated by the COVID. And you see at the bottom right, COVID-19, the long COVID is a new wild card. We don't know if that will be an accelerating factor in cognitive decline with age. Time will tell. But now I'll just give you 2 quick examples of specific studies published recently, 3 weeks ago. This one is in the US. It's looking at risk factors that you can modify, the risk factors that are specific for essentially heart and stroke. So diabetes, it increases your risk of dementia by 1.6. So hazard ratio It multiples the risk by 1.6. Physical inactivity is close also to 1.6, and obesity 1.76. And if you have all three, your risk of dementia is even higher than individual items. So this is typical North American. Something we can do something about: physical inactivity, obesity, and if you have diabetes, just be aggressive about its treatment. And now, on a more positive note, the Chinese study. And I was fortunate to be one of the co-authors. So I'll tell you a little bit about it, and it has some relevance to our daily life, as I will explain. So these are, it's a cohort of close to 30,000 Chinese living in cities and rural regions over age 60. So the mean age was 72. They were monitored over 10 years. They had a specific memory test called the auditory verbal learning test. It was developed in California. It was well adapted to Chinese. It's valid. And they looked at what happens if you have 4 or more out of 6 healthy habits versus no healthy habits, or just 1 or 2. And healthy habits in that study were healthy diet, and I'll give you the specifics of the diet in a minute because I know someone will ask. Regular physical exercise, so that's 150 minutes per week, and that could be just fast walking. It doesn't have to be gym. Active social contact, in their definition, is 2 or more per week. Active cognitive activity is 2 or more per week, and that could be reading, it could be going to see a play or whatever. No smoking, and no alcohol. No alcohol was harsh, but that's the way they defined a healthy habit in that study. And as I will show you the curves, if you have 4 or out of the 6 of these healthy habits, your memory decline is much less than if you have only 1 or none. And the good news is that even if you have the ApoE4 from one side of the family, you're still protected. So let's see the numbers. So you see on the left, the green line is everybody has a slight decline on their memory test over 10 years. That's normal. The one in red is a faster decline if you have 1 or out of 6 or less healthy habit. And the blue in the middle is if you have 2 or 3 healthy habits. The bottom left is even if you're ApoE4 carrier, you still have the protective effect. So that's a positive thing. If you know there's a family history of Alzheimer, someone over, let's say, age 70 to 80, yeah, that could be a ApoE4 factor. You may have the test or not, but you can still take advantage of these healthy risk factors to offset that genetic risk. And if you happen to have vascular risk factors, well, deal with it. And that's additional value to your preventive approach. Now the diet, because I know someone will ask, so I put it up for you. So it would be 7 or more out of 12 food items. And this is a typical Chinese diet. So caution. So fruits, vegetables, fish, meat, dairy products, salt, oil, eggs, cereals, legumes. I'm not sure what that means. It's translated from Chinese, nuts, and tea. So here it would be slightly different. You may have read that green tea also is protective in Japan, and some other diet, there may be some merit. We can discuss that in the question and answer period. I just want to caution you not to go crazy on the one particular food supplement. Just have a balanced diet, avoid red meat. If you have only 1 glass of alcohol, try to use red wine if you like red wine. It's there's a natural antioxidant in the red wine that you don't get with the white. Okay, to summarize, there's a new biologic definition of Alzheimer, ATN, but there are other proteins at play which we will not get into today. There are cohorts that you can be part of, so you get a full bilan of your cognition and your brain chemistry, and you can ask as much as you want out of your individual results. The advantage of being known to be ATN positive at age 65, even if you have no symptoms, is if there's a study available to prevent further buildup of these proteins while you're available. So it's called trial-ready cohort. So you're the first one called if we have a new study to reduce amyloid, tau, or neuroinflammation. And finally, observational studies, such as the one in China, They show there are protective factors. Some are really simple. And then if you're at higher risk because of you have vascular risk factors, yeah, you can deal with it. So intervention studies, we're nearly done, bear with me. So this is something quite original that was done in Finland close to 10 years ago. It's a study called FINGER, F-I-N for Finland. And they look for over 1,200 volunteers who were slightly at risk and ages 60 to 77. And they were randomized to regular health for a Finnish population or multi-domain intervention. So keyword multi-domain. So they had a combination of advice for nutrition. Probably in Finland, they have fish twice a day already. So maybe they have fish 3 times a day. I don't know. But anyway, in Finland, they had a nutritional advice, exercise, physical exercise with a coach, cognitive training. So preferably done with a group. It's more efficient if you do cognitive training with a small group, social activities, and then vascular risk monitoring. So that's the full package. And what happens over 2 years? This is it. Everybody gets better. So even if you're in the regular care, because you're enrolled in a study, you're monitored more closely. So everybody got better over 2 years. But those who were the full package, they got even better. So in these graphs, you see in red those who had the multi-domain intervention versus the blue, those who had just regular care. And the point being made here is not only everybody got better, but if you had the full package, you get these extra improvement for global cognition, executive function, processing speed, and memory. The surprise is not that memory so much improved, it's that the ability to think quickly, to adjust to situations, what we call executive ability was actually improved more than memory. And that translates into more autonomy for instrumental activities of daily living. You can pay your bills longer on your own and better than if you just do nothing and just go see your doctor once a year. So that was encouraging. Now, if you follow these people who had this 2-year treatment, what happens 5 years and 7 years later, there's a persistence of the benefit. So, and it's not just memory and executive ability where there's a difference. It's also, there's a less risk of cardiovascular events. Those who had the full package, which includes vascular risk factor management, there's less likely to have a stroke or heart attack. 30% lower risk for functional decline, losing your ability to function in your routine. These are people who are living at home, by the way, to start with. Better health, quality of life. So it's kind of a big investment for the first 2 years because you have people going through a nutritionist, seeing a doctor for their vascular risk factors. There's an exercise group, physical, there's a cognitive training group. It sounds expensive, but the payoff 7 years later is big. And guess what? Even if you have an ApoE4, you still get benefit from the full package. That's also good news. So it's like the Chinese study. Even if you have some genetic risk of getting Alzheimer's late in life, you can offset that risk with a healthy lifestyle. And here, with this package of cognitive training, exercise, and watching your vascular risk factors. And they just published even more good news is if you have, before you join such a program, small stroke or TIA or some vascular risk factor, your risk of having another stroke is reduced by the full treatment. Well, I think that's no surprise because it includes vascular risk management. Okay. So they're continuing with that study. Just to let you know, because you may read about it, this model, multi-domain intervention, no drug, is now going to be amplified with medicinal food. So in Europe, they're using some kind of yogurt that is rich in certain nutritional factors and mixed vitamins. I don't think it's going to add value, but it's being tried because it's popular in Europe. There's also a study with metformin. That may be of interest if you're diabetic. Metformin is one of the old drugs for diabetes, but it's also potentially an anti-inflammatory drug. It may enhance some oxygen consumption and make it more efficient in the brain. There's something about metformin that is now bringing it to the forefront as a medication to prevent progression to dementia if you're at slightly higher risks than average. And is there an equivalent of finger in Canada? Yes, it's called CAN, thumbs up. So I'll tell you a bit about that because you can actually join that study. That's a third study you can join. So it's called Synergic trial. If you want to look it up on Google, it's not fully published yet, but this is a description of what the study looked like at the start, Synergic. And I'll just show you the highlights. So it was 20 weeks of people going through a combination, multi-modal aerobic and resistance training. So it's quite extensive physical training with emphasis on balance improvement and cognitive training and vitamin D. So that was unique to the Canadian study. They wanted to see vitamin D was added value to having the physical and cognitive exercise. The short answer is it did not. Vitamin D did not amplify the benefit from the exercise. But these are people who are not vitamin D deficient. This was considered as a supplement. And just to show you some features of the Canadian study, cognitive training was done to some degree at home because of the pandemic. So they invented a cognitive training tool that you can do on an iPad. The physical exercise had to be adapted for home training because of the pandemic. And vitamin D supplements, that's something familiar. And the results, they're just a highlight because it's not been published fully yet. In red, you see people who had the combination of physical exercise and cognitive training. They improved compared to their startup quite significantly with that particular measurement tool of memory and other cognitive abilities. And just to make the point that vitamin D was not added benefit to the cognitive training. Now, you can join such a study right now. So this is one slide you may want to take a picture of. At EPIC, which is at the Institut de Cardiologie de Montréal, they have a bilingual program where you will have a very structured physical training program, which was built on their experience with people who had heart attacks. So it's very well monitored. You will not have a heart attack while you're doing these exercises, that's for sure. And also cognitive training. So it's a combination of the two. This is underway now. Dr. Louis Béraire, you see on the bottom left his email address, Louis Béraire. Notice it's BH. I always put the H in the wrong place. Louis Béraire, bh@ufm.ca. And the bottom right, you cannot read it, it's too small, but there's a phone number which I will give you at the end of the talk. So this you can sign up, it's bilingual, I checked already. And I checked the phone number, it works. So just to finish, there's a lot of finger-like studies underway. Guess what? People like you who are listening, who are generally healthy and smart, you won't get a lot of improvement from these studies as individuals. It's people who have higher risk that will benefit the most. Don't be surprised. But they're not the ones who will participate in these studies, unfortunately. So when we have all the evidence in 3 years, 4 years, from Synergic and similar studies around the world, in terms of government policy, does everybody go through the big package of a nutritionist, vascular cognitive assessment by a stroke expert, cognitive training and physical exercise in a gym paid by the state? It won't happen, I think, unless you have a higher risk to start with. So let's be honest about that. But if you sign up now as a volunteer, it's all covered by research funds. And just to whet your appetite, if you want to read more about all this, the World Alzheimer Report, which was put together by McGill team, 2021 about diagnosis, 2022 about management. You can get this for free download. Go to ADI, Alzheimer Disease International, and you will get the two reports. The one in 2022, there's a chapter about prevention strategies for risk reduction. So you can look up the chapter 23. I checked, it works, alzint.org. It works, that link. ALZ for Alzheimer, INT, international, INT.org. And you can go World Alzheimer Report 2022, download chapter 23, and these are the topics you can read about. So, and this is a complement to my presentation. So to summarize, and that's my last slide, population-based prevention is currently the most realistic way to decrease dementia prevalence. It's not going to be one drug. There's no magic drug, contrary to what US politicians are saying. Now, a personalized approach based on genetic risk, ApoE4 in particular, and biological risk, such as a high p-tau in the blood, may be possible, as with chronic conditions such as diabetes. So there's going to be a shift in the way we think of Alzheimer's in the next 2-3 years to make it a chronic illness with a long asymptomatic phase, an early symptomatic phase, and then let's call it organ failure phase, which is dementia right now. Discuss your risk factors with your family doctor. If you have mild diabetes, maybe you should treat it a little more aggressively. If you're obese, just try to lose weight. If you have a stroke risk, just deal with it with the best antiplatelet or anticoagulant available. You have to be upfront about that. And you can sign up as a volunteer, especially if you have slight risk, vascular risk, or if you have a family history. It's even better if you sign up for these things because you're the group that is most likely to take advantage of these prevention strategies. So to summarize, MOCA, so just go at info@MOCA test. This is to test the MOCA online, a new version of the MOCA. Triad, it's the cohort study at McGill where we do a total sort of a brain checkup and memory test, and we feed you the information afterwards if you want to know. And EPIC, that's the equivalent of Synergic or Finger. It's available now, multimodal intervention. And this is the phone number you could not read in the previous slide. So have a look, 374-1480, extension 4345. And I checked the number, it works.